with the group of folks that we have. It's always great to hear their stories and see what's going on and updates in their life. And so I'm a little bit bummed for that. But hi, everybody. My name is Tyler Williamson. I am the current mayor of the city of Monterey. And, I like to start my story off by just kind of sharing about my parents. My mom served in the Navy for 20 years. My father was born in Mississippi. And when he was 12 years old, him and his family migrated up to Albany, New York. My mom is from a town about 45 minutes north of Albany called Glens Falls. So they met, and my mom then joined the military. I was born, and my older brother were both born in a naval hospital at her first duty station. I have two younger brothers as well. And so we never lived anywhere for more than 4 years our entire lives. Even after I graduated from high school, my mom had got out of the military at that point, and I went to the preparatory school for the Naval Academy in Newport, Rhode Island for a year. And then I went to the Naval Academy for a year as a plebe in Annapolis, Maryland. I got kicked out of the Naval Academy, and I will come back to that part of my story in a little bit. But after I got kicked out of the Naval Academy, I moved in with my parents for 6 months. By that point, my mom had moved to Connecticut, where one of her duty stations were. So moved to Connecticut with my mom and dad. And then I realized once you move out of your parents' home, it's hard to move back in. And so I decided to go with my then girlfriend to San Diego. And so that was in 2008. I moved back to San Diego, where I went to high school. And then between 2008, 2010, that was like the point in my life where I really started discovering politics and getting involved with kind of what was going on in the world. I mean, before I just didn't care. I was disconnected. It was just all this complicated stuff, loud noise that I just wasn't really interested in. And I'll say, when I graduated from high school, I always had this like fundamental desire to want to help people. So when I graduated, my thought was, let me go to medical school, become a doctor. It's a very hands-on, tangible way of helping people. And I got this, I'm kind of jumping all over the place here a little bit, but I got this value from my mom in her service to our country. She always got my brothers and I involved in different activities within our community. And so I would volunteer in soup kitchens, feeding the homeless. I participated in Boy Scouts. I became an Eagle Scout. So just anywhere I've ever lived, I've always been super involved. And then when I got back to San Diego in 2008, I saw this guy on TV that kind of looked like me, that was running for president of the United States. And so obviously he had a huge influence on my life. But I was in community college at the time, and I happened to be taking critical thinking class. And, sometimes it's just that class is the professor. And so this professor, just the way that they taught the class, we learned about civil disobedience. And, there was all these like really amazing things that I had learned before, but it was just the way that she was teaching it. And so between her way of making me think about the world and seeing Obama on TV running for president, I was like, you know what, I'm going to just kind of play with this a little bit and see what's going on. So I signed up to be a volunteer on Obama's campaign. And I did a couple of volunteer events, though I couldn't get as involved as I wanted to, because I was going to school full time. I was working 2 jobs, just trying to make it. But I had committed to myself that when the 2012 campaign came around, that I would sign up and get more involved. One other thing I did while I was in San Diego was I went to my congressman's office and I asked to participate in an internship. And so I did that for a year and a half before I left San Diego to come to Monterey. So at that point in 2010, I moved to Monterey. And then 2012 came, Obama's reelection. And I went to his campaign website because I said I was going to volunteer in a deeper way next time around. And it was April 2012. I went to his website, and there was a program called a fellowship program. So I signed up for the fellowship program, got accepted into that. I went up to Hayward for a week-long training. And they were training us on how to run the campaign at a local level. And so what they tasked us to do was to go back to our neighborhoods, join a neighborhood team in a leadership role. Well, there was nothing at all in the Obama campaign in the entire county of Monterey. So they turned to me and they're like, we want you to go back to Monterey and create the first neighborhood team. I was like, okay, here we go. So I used the tools that they gave me, and I built the team, and people started coming. And I honestly think it was just like people were waiting for somebody to just get things going, which is, I would share with you a theme of an opportunity that exists for all of us, right? Sometimes people are just waiting for somebody to get it going. I'm sure you all have seen the videos of somebody dancing in the park, and then, other people join, and next thing you know, the whole hillside is dancing. And so that's kind of what this effect was when I started the team in Monterey. And after 3 weeks of doing that, they turned around and offered me a position on the campaign, where I was ultimately responsible for the Obama campaign out of the San Francisco headquarters. So I took a leave of absence from school and work to go up there and do that. And of course, as you all know, as you all may know, the fundamental piece of Obama's campaign was community organizing. He was a community organizer before he ran for office, and that kind of carried throughout his campaigns. So I got to learn more of those skills on the staff, and just developed a lot of great relationships. And that obviously led to the successful reelection of President Obama. And afterwards, I had to come back to Monterey. And so it is important for me to pause here and just share with you all that in 2012, while I was working on the Obama campaign, that's when I came out. And I was coming out to myself, I ultimately ended up coming out to my family. I met my first male partner while I was in San Francisco. They put the headquarters smack dab in the middle of the Castro. And so they had these ceiling to floor windows, and I could just see people walking by all day, beautiful people walking by all day. And luckily I had some amazing volunteers that kind of helped me work through kind of being comfortable with who I am. And one of my volunteers took me out one night bowling, and that's where I met my first male partner. So after the campaign was over, I had to figure out how I'm going to do this. So I ended up, telling my parents and making that transition. All this to say, go to 2017, I was more comfortable with who I was. I was wanting to get back in the swing of being involved in the community, because I was driving back and forth between San Francisco and Monterey for about 3 times a week. And so it was a lot. It just didn't have enough extra time. So I helped found Monterey Peninsula Pride in 2017. And we've hosted a Pride event on the Monterey Peninsula every year since. So 2017, 2018, we did it in Seaside. And then 2019, we did it in Monterey for the first time. 2020 and 2021, we did a virtual event because of the pandemic. And then we just held it again in 2022 in Monterey. We're already getting ready to plan for 2023 now, and that's going to be on July 15th, I want to say, whatever that Saturday is there. So mark your calendars, and I hope that you can attend that event. But yeah, that was one of the ways that I started getting back more involved in the community. And because when I originally got involved in politics, it was because of Obama. It was the national stuff. So I was watching CNN all the time and picking up all this information that was happening at a more national, global level. And so I really enjoyed being involved in politics, but I wasn't doing it in the way that I don't think was fully fulfilling. And so when I got involved with the local Democratic Party, I started understanding local politics a lot more. And one of the things that I realized was there's a lot of these people that are in elected office that are speaking about the values that I have. But when it came time to doing action, to do something about those values, I wasn't seeing it. And so that's really what propelled me to run for office, because I thought it was important to get the things done. And that's truly what my election for city council in 2018 when I ran, and then again for mayor last year. So I'm all about getting things done. A lot of it focuses on true grassroots, people power work and issues, right? So we're looking at things like housing affordability. The cost of housing is freaking too high, as I'm sure you all know. And by the way, I'm not the type of person to say something is too challenging, so let's just not address it. No, no, no. It's probably more reason for us to tackle that. How can we start having conversations about it, water it down, kind of make it simple for folks to be able to digest it, and tangible action that we can do to be able to make progress? Not to say that we're going to solve it overnight, but how can we make that progress and moving things forward in small ways? And so housing is a huge piece of that. And I'll split into two buckets. We need to create more housing stock, housing supply, which is probably the biggest factor that causes the high cost of housing, right? It's a supply and demand issue. It's an economics issue. So if you don't create enough supply, as your population continues to grow, the price will continue to rise up, because the wealthiest people will continue to outbid each other. And then the poorest people, when those wealthy people buy up all the property, the poor people get pushed down, and that's how we end up with homelessness. So we need to create more housing stock. 66% of Monterey residents are renters. And that's a fair majority of our residents are renters. Yet we don't have any policies that create protections for that community. So that's one of the big things that I want to look at on my term as mayor. Water is very much connected to housing. And then my last thing that I will share is, gentrification. The last thing that I will share is civic engagement. It's the most, put aside all the issues, the most important thing to me is, right, we live in a democracy, but that's like on paper. How do we actually truly live up to that? It requires us to find a way of removing those barriers that exist that allow people to want to participate. There are systemic issues that prevent people from participating. And so when I look at my council meetings, I'm actually about to get ready to go back to my council meeting here in a second. Most of the people that show up and speak during public comment are homeowners. Well, there's something wrong with that, right? When the majority of our residents are renters and we're not hearing from them, then there's something deeply wrong with that. What are those barriers that exist that prevent those folks from wanting to participate? Well, maybe they're working multiple jobs. They're trying to take care of their families. They're younger folks. They're, people of color. They might be undocumented. They, maybe they showed up to a council meeting before in the past and nobody listened to what they said. So they said, why am I going to waste my time? Maybe we're not addressing the issues that are important to them. That's a big piece of it. So it's really important that we find ways of engaging people in the political process. And so I just encourage you all to find a way of getting plugged in. All politics is local. We need to hear your voice. So if anybody's here on the Monterey Peninsula, please, I encourage you to show up anytime, speak during public comment. We give everybody 3 minutes that wants to show up. And we do listen to you. And it's not just on my council, but it really makes a difference when people show up and voice their opinion. This will be the last thing I'll say, and I'll be quiet. I literally had a colleague on the council say, I was the only one that raised any issues when I was a council member. And I literally had a colleague say, I can't remember exactly what the issue was, but he says, I feel like you're creating a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. And my response to him was, it does exist. I've had people in the community tell me their issue with this, but it sounds like they are not talking to you about it because they probably don't feel comfortable, right? And so part of it is like, we have to be able to create a space where people feel comfortable in talking to us. But on the flip side, it makes it harder for people that like me that want to fight for the people to do that if the public isn't holding us accountable. So even if you have an elected body that is supportive of the policies that you think are the right direction to go in, it is important, it is essential that you show up and you voice your opinion, whether you're in agreement or not. Because now that if particularly with this scenario with my colleague that's saying, he feels like I'm creating a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. Now I can say, well, did you hear Susie and Bobby that just showed up and spoke during public comments? Now you're on record having heard people in the public say it. So it's really important that you use your voice to be heard. And I said I was going to stop talking, so I'll pause here to see.
Couple questions for you. So could you talk a little bit about your experiences in history? Did you see yourself in your history classes growing up? Number one. Number two, your experience at CSU MB. And then number three, your best advice to future elementary teachers as far as teaching history.
Sorry, you might have to ask me those.
All right, let's start with, what was history like growing up for you? Did you see yourself in the history books? Anything along those lines?
Yeah, so as I'm sure a lot of you know, well, from my experience, I'm a queer person. And so when I look back at my history classes and what we talked about as far as LGBTQ plus history, it was like a paragraph in a chapter of the history book. And it was like Stonewall, there was this thing that happened, an incident occurred, and they advocated for their rights. And then we kind of moved on to the next thing. And it was like, no, there's some deeper stuff there, right? Like Stonewall riots is what started pride parades. And, it was led by transgender folks that were trying to advocate for the rights of all LGBTQ plus people. And there was conflicts. They were getting beat up by police officers, by law enforcement. And those acts and behaviors still exist today. And so there's value in that. And yeah, so I think that I would use that example as like the LGBTQ plus side. Another obvious one is like, Thanksgiving and peace, and, not really going into detail about how the things that were done in the past, particularly to brown and Black people, how those issues still exist today. So when we talk about our Indigenous community members, it's important to address where we screwed that up, and how we continue to screw that up. And so, particularly for me being Black, we did talk about civil rights and civil disobedience, and, I think it was discussed a little bit more. But again, I think the important piece is that critical thinking part, where it's like, hey, this is the history. This is why we're teaching it to you. And it says why it's relevant today. So how can we use, current issues in society and make that relevant to why that issue in the past is an important part of our story and our history.
And then CSUMB, what was your degree and what was your experience at CSUMB?
Yeah, so I majored in human communications with a concentration in pre-law. And my experience at CSUMB was phenomenal. I loved CSUMB. When I was reading about it, so first of all, I didn't really want to go to CSUMB. I wanted to go to a school that had a political science program, but it just didn't make sense for me when I was working a full-time job. The school was right here. But when I went online to read about it, the mission of the school, the mission and the charge of the human communications program really just sung to me in a really loud voice. And what made it such a wonderful experience was my faculty members. And I still have a relationship with a lot of them today, because a lot of them do community activism. And so I'll see them at rallies or, at speaking engagements, because they're integrated within the community. And I just learned so much for them. I mean, I did, restorative justice, as opposed to the criminal justice system that we have, which actually looks back to how they handled justice from the Native Americans, right? So, critical thinking, I did a class on understanding my First Amendment rights, and the list goes on and on. I had my service learning class was, oh God, what was the name of it? Anyways, it doesn't matter. There was just really awesome classes that I took. Had a wonderful experience while attending CSUMB. The only thing I would say is I understand and I get it where people feel frustrated, because I think any organization might have a charge or a mission that they set for themselves that they make it too hard for them to reach it. But I think CSUMB in a large way backs it up. Not to say that it doesn't still have work towards getting better. But look at how much diversity exists on CSUMB campus and compared to the other CSUs. So, I really appreciate the work that's being done at CSUMB, and I'm really honored to be an alum.
Cool. And so, Tyler, let me introduce you to my colleague, Casey Mastrup, who's the other co-teacher here. Casey, any final question you want to ask Tyler, and then we'll let him get back to his city council meeting?
No, I think you've got a lot on your plate right now to have to go back to that meeting, but I just want to, thank you and just think about everyone in this room as being someone who's really invested. I've heard a lot of the teachers talk about being part of this community and wanting to stay in this community. And so I appreciated you sharing kind of your experiences with that and kind of how to help them bring their voice forward, and really kind of makes, and like Mia kind of mentioned some things in the chat as well, and so did Maria, just about those struggles of finding their home, that they want to stay here in this space. So I really appreciate you being here to kind of add that invitation to have them come share their voice.
Yeah.
So no, I don't have any other questions, but just more of like a thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Casey, and it's nice to meet you virtually. You know, I get it. It's really tough. It's really challenging. And it's all the more reason why it's important for folks to show up. So I'd encourage you, just put it on your calendar, right? Like whatever city you live in, see how frequently your council meets. Our council in the city of Monterey meets twice a month. That's pretty typical around the peninsula. Maybe just make an effort to show up to one council meeting a month, or once a quarter, or once, you know, or twice a year, or once a year, whatever kind of you find that works for you. Find that kind of space to just kind of show up, be present, have your voice heard, because I promise you it does make a difference. The housing issue is so complex. I know it feels like it's hard to find where I insert myself, but 2 or 3 people showing up and speaking about the need for housing affordability during a council meeting every now and then, it really makes a difference to be like, yeah, I know that I'm going on the right path. And I can remember, I can reference that with my colleague who says, I'm creating a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. So it's just so important that you use your voice. For those of you that have little ones, I know that you all are becoming teachers. It's important to set that as an example, as a role model, to show what it's like to be engaged and to participate in your community. Obviously, voting is the #1 most essential way for you to be engaged and involved in your community. It's your right as a citizen. But beyond that, you know, how can you really step in and make a greater difference? So, you know, I'll put my email in the chat, and if anybody ever wants to reach out to me, if they have any questions, you know, just want to talk out maybe what's on your mind in regards to finding a way of getting engaged and involved, feel free to hit me up. So it was such a pleasure being here with you all, and I just really appreciative of Rob giving me a little bit of time to catch up with you all.
Thanks, Tyler. See you later.
All right, take care, everybody.